Brightmarsh is the new map coming with OB49. It's currently on the public test server, and this is not a test map, this is going straight into the Siege queue. If you hadn't played in the PTS quite a few patches ago when Atrium was in the patch, this is that map just with all of the art added to it. And you could have seen that in my old video when I covered these maps. Atrium was actually one of my favourite maps, and it's definitely translated well into this current form, and I think it has been tweaked little bits and there's little extra areas to go to. It's not only exciting that there's another map, a siege map to play on that's going to be in the normal queue, but it's also exciting because this is the first time we've seen some lore for a very long time. And this time round, this map is Pip's hometown. In the spawn room, the first thing you can see behind you, there are 4 portraits of Pip-like creatures, so the sort of vulpine creature that Pip is. We have several of these characters. They all look almost a cross between something in a steampunk realm with all of sort of the goggles sort of thing Pip has, all of the potions in their pouches, and then also crossed with an almost Amish sort of vibe, or Amish or whatever you call it, the American subculture where people live in the past and don't have any sort of mod cons or technology. Although, like I say, each of these characters, the ones that seem to be important, not just the villagers, which are more Amish looking, have this sort of alchemy symbol, the potion symbol on them. So both the one with the goggles that looks something like an aristocrat or perhaps maybe a scientist, and then the other one which looks like a medic or a doctor who also has a potion sign on their chest. And in the dev stream they said that it was a community of alchemists, and that's a big part of Pip's species, or this community of that species revolves around. That also extends all around the map, where there's lots of potion shops and this sort of alchemy going on. And one little touch that's really interesting is that if you fly up to the top where there's loads of crops growing on the hilltop, each of the crop or the sort of ingredient and plant that you use in the potions that these creatures are making are marked with a symbol, and at least most of their language seems to be symbol based unless it's just for the ingredients. But these ingredients also match some pages that are scattered around. There seem to be ingredients for these potions where there's sort of these symbols and then adding up to make a sort of potion for another symbol. Most of the architecture is very serene, very high fantasy. In some ways the roundedness of the buildings are almost kind of Roman, and the tiles are sort of that way too, but in a very sort of almost leaf and more natural way. And nature seems to be a very big part of this subculture, and there's sort of like aqueducts full of plants and plants dotted around everywhere, and plants being grown inside, outside, and on top of the buildings. The potion symbols are also across all of the shops and the buildings around the map. Another thing that's interesting is the marsh itself, where this map is situated, and the devs also said that it's sort of a paradise within a marsh, and they didn't want to have just a marsh environment, they wanted something that's inside a marsh that surrounds it. And this marsh is comprised of gigantic mushrooms, and below that there is a sort of toxic green marshland or liquid or whatever it might be, and there are signs on the side that show clearly that Pip's species aren't gonna do very well if they fall into that. It's difficult to say whether it's like a drowning sign because they look like they're flailing, or just means you're gonna die if you drop in there. I mean, if you test that, you do die if you drop into it, and you also die if you go to the edge of the map. The one thing that is interesting about this border of the marshes and the toxicity is there is a house, one of these Pip houses, in the distance beyond where this toxic lake or pond is. Why that's interesting is because I thought initially perhaps there was sort of a conspiracy going on here. Like, it could be that the creatures that exist in this society is very insular and doesn't want anybody to leave, and perhaps there is sort of a lie or a stretched truth about what exactly lies beyond the society that already exists here. Now, in the old Pip lore, when I talk about the old lore, some of it might not carry over, and we don't know exactly how much they will bring to current, but they did talk about this in the stream as well, that Pip was somebody that was an orphan, and one of the only people from this community that had been able to leave, or wanted to leave. And partly the reason for this was that Pip was an orphan, and perhaps never really fit in. The society here seems to forbid any sort of violence, and that's what they talked about in the dev stream, that they're very peaceful. They seem to exist just off of vegetables and things like that. And interestingly, the creatures in some of the images almost have buck teeth, like rounded teeth, rather than the sharp teeth that Pip has. So it could be that perhaps he is a bit of an outsider in his own society in that regard, but that could just be updated designs. It actually reminds me a lot of the bunny community in Zootopia as well, like how they just didn't really leave their own society and nobody really saw a reason to, because food was abundant and life was sort of idyllic, and I guess like Hobbiton in the Lord of the Rings as well. In some of the original lore that they released, the idea was that Pip had stolen a potion guarded by the alchemists of the Iron Shrine, and for me, these creatures don't seem like they are the Iron Shrine that Pip stole from, so perhaps Pip left the sanctuary of this society and went out and then stole it from another community. And then one of the things that's been repeated with a lot of the early characters is that they are all heading to Crosswind Hold. What Crosswind Hold actually is questionable. Is it an area? Is it the capital city or the land of opportunity like, say, the New World, the Americas were back in the day? Or is it perhaps some sort of gladiatorial ring or some way of proving yourself as a champion, and all the champions in the game have these crystals on them? Why are they called Paladins? Are they shipped into a different world? What exactly is going on there? I mean, the actual way the game works is 5v5, it is very arena based. The idea of Fernando going in, trying to pretend to be a knight and make a name for himself, and all the champions wanting to make the name of themselves, sort of points to this. But this area, this land, does seem to exist outside of that. The only question I have, and some of the lore and some of the themes that the maps have had before, is that there's some sort of cataclysm or that has happened in the realm. For example, in Stone Keep, there are massive plants growing out of the castle itself, almost like cracking through it, and there's holes in the walls and things like that, as if something happened around there. And obviously every map is empty, whether or not that's just because obviously there's going to be fights in them, or if something happened to clear all of the populations out. And the same with this map, there are massive mushrooms all around the marshes covering the outside of the map. Does that have something to do with the cataclysm that happened in the world? Do they all link up? And the big one with the lore is the moon itself being shattered. Did something happen there? I think there's a lot of themes about gods in the game as well, and what happened with the gods. Cassie stole her father a god's bow, but it's quite interesting how Pip leaves this society, probably outside of Crosswind Hold, and is heading there. And whether or not the rest of the world has been affected by something and might be the reason why people are leaving or moving out, or why there's these areas that are now deserted. One little secretive little area is by each of the spawn points. On the left hand side if you're attacking, or on the right hand side if you're defending, there's a little alcove if you jump around where there are some waterfalls, and there's a little stop with a door and a lamp on it, and you can actually flank around here. But it looks very cool, and honestly, this map is rather beautiful, and there's lots of other beautiful things in this map that aren't just lore based, like little water features, and like I mentioned before, the water feature in the aqueduct. There's a little fountain with little holes coming out, and there's wheelbarrows and pitchforks almost littered around the whole of the map. Also very cool, like I mentioned with the hills, there's just ladders leading up them and almost terraced little farms going on the top. This map is another step up from Stone Keep, which already was setting the bar pretty high in terms of map design and how good things look. There's also an area in the spawn room to go up higher where you can go on a little perch. There's two little zones where you can jump up to on the top, or walk around onto the steps and go onto the top galleyway inside as well, just to make the spawn rooms less boring. How the map plays out is still to be seen a little bit, because in the PTS they've only had so many games, and in Atrium as well, there was a thing about the point being quite cluster fuckable, a bit like Frozen Guard, where you can break apart the Death Ball comps where you have two tanks quite easily if they're stuck on the point, because there's only so many areas for them to retreat to and not get blasted inside by a Drogoz, a Willow, or somebody else that does a lot of area damage like a Bomb King. But like Frozen Guard, there is an area above the atrium sort of building where you can go into the dome, and you can, as a Willow or a Drogoz, fly up there, but it's hard to approach if you aren't a champion that normally goes into the air. There's also really cool areas where you flank and fight, where there's the big drop on the right hand side or left hand side depending on which way you go, and also loads of tight buildings where fights between hitscan characters and characters that can 1v1, especially flankers, might be having their little duels. The map isn't too long either, and it's easy to get back into the fight on either side. And generally I just think this is a great map going forward and might be one of the main ones in the map rotations in the competitive scene as well. Maybe it'll not be knocked off straight away, although as it's early, people might not want to play it as much because they don't have as much experience. Anyway, again, it's nice to have some lore in the game, but I still feel that there's a big hole in Paladin's heart where there just needs to be the backbone of a story or a world that sort of exists connected with each other. We're getting now little bits about individual characters, and that's great. So we're getting more about Pip. I think lore can really give a lot of heart to these characters and make them more meaningful to play and to talk about the taboo, but Overwatch did it really well by having backstories on each character on the world and how they fit into it. And there's lots more fan art and lore and fan stories about what exactly is happening in this world, and people attach themselves to that a little bit more, and obviously that's great. That'd be great to have with Paladins as well. Obviously they keep teasing at more lore coming out. Whether this was what they meant, I'm not sure, but hopefully there'll be something that can tie everything together. What is Crosswind Hold? Why is everybody here? Why are there paladins? Why does everybody have this crystal symbol on them? Or why is it so important to the paladins world? Anyway, what does everybody else think of the map? What does everybody think about the characterization of Pip's species that he came from? Obviously it's not exactly outlining what Pip is, because obviously Pip left there and didn't really want to have much to do with it apart from the potions which he's carried on, even if he stole it from a different tribe, these Iron Shrine people, whoever they may be. Be sure to let me know in the comment section below all of your thoughts and your feelings on this map. Also, what are your lore theories? Do you think there's something more to these designs and potions and ingredients that I showed in the video? Perhaps some of these ingredients are the fire potions that Pip stole. Also, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you want to see more of my content. I've been Joshino, and I'll see you all next time.